My name is Rebecca Thornton. I am 67 years old, and on the morning my life was publicly reduced to two careless words, I learned how quickly a room can decide who you are. Just a housewife. The words came from my stepson, Tyler Thornton, spoken with a light laugh in a courtroom packed with strangers. The sound traveled farther than it should have. Heads turned. Some people studied me with curiosity, others with quiet judgment, and a few with something that looked like pity. I kept my eyes forward, my hands folded tightly around the handle of my purse, forcing them not to tremble. 6 months earlier, my husband Charles had died. We had been married for 20 years. 20 ordinary, extraordinary years built on shared routines, private jokes, and a kind of steady partnership that doesn't announce itself loudly. When Charles passed, his will left everything to me. His company, his properties, his savings. Not because I demanded it, because he chose it. Tyler refused to accept that choice. He sued me, claiming I had manipulated his father, isolated him, and taken advantage of an aging man who no longer knew what he was doing. According to him, I had rewritten history, and the will, purely for my own benefit. He hired the most expensive attorney in the city to prove it. I stood alone at the defense table. No lawyer beside me, no legal team whispering advice. Just a woman in a simple navy dress, holding a small purse like it was the only solid thing left in the world. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old arguments, the kind of place where truth is supposed to matter, but reputation often matters more. Across the aisle sat Tyler, 35 years old. Perfectly tailored suit, relaxed posture. He looked confident, comfortable, like someone attending a meeting he already knew the outcome of. Beside him sat his attorney, Blake Harrington. I recognized the name immediately. People spoke it carefully like a warning. Ruthless, brilliant, expensive, the kind of man you hired when you wanted to win without mercy. When the judge entered, everyone stood. Judge Caroline Mercer moved with calm authority, her gaze sweeping the room as if weighing every presence before her. When she took her seat, the room felt smaller somehow. Blake Harrington rose for his opening statement, adjusting his cuffs with deliberate precision. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "this is a clear case of undue influence. A woman with no meaningful career, no significant education, and no independent income inserted herself into the life of a wealthy widower at precisely the right moment." His voice was calm, almost conversational, as if he were explaining something obvious. "Mrs. Thornton," he continued, "presented herself as a caretaker, but slowly assumed total control, financial, emotional, and personal, over my client's father." Then Tyler leaned forward slightly and added, "She's just a housewife." Something shifted, not in me, yet, but in the man standing across from us. Blake's voice faltered mid-sentence. His face lost its color. For a brief moment, he simply stared at me, as if trying to place a memory that refused to stay buried. His briefcase slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a sharp thud, papers spilling out. It's really you," he whispered, barely audible. No one else seemed to understand why the air had suddenly changed. Tyler didn't notice. He was too busy believing he had already won. The morning that set everything in motion had started quietly, like every morning since Charles died. Heavy. Still. I made coffee in the ceramic mug he gave me for our 15th anniversary, white, with a thin blue line around the rim. I sat at the kitchen table where we had shared countless small conversations and tried not to notice how loud the silence felt. The house was too big now. Every room carried him in small, painful ways. His shoes by the door, his glasses on the side table, the chair where he used to sit and read in the evenings. I was still sitting there when the doorbell rang. A young man stood on the porch wearing a cheap suit and a carefully neutral expression. He handed me an envelope without meeting my eyes. "Mrs. Thornton, legal documents, please sign here." My hands shook as I opened the papers. Tyler was contesting the will. The language was cold and precise. Undue influence, manipulation, exploitation of a vulnerable elderly man. According to the documents, I had isolated Charles from his son and convinced him to leave me everything. I sank into Charles's old leather chair, the one he used to nap in on Sunday afternoons. 20 years of marriage reduced to accusations printed in black ink. I wasn't angry yet. I was stunned. I thought of the nights I slept upright beside his hospital bed, the medications I learned to organize, the meals I prepared when he was too weak to stand. I remembered calling Tyler again and again, asking him to visit, explaining how much it would mean to his father. I'm busy, Tyler had said. Later. Later never came. When Charles died, Tyler appeared at the funeral, composed and distant. He hugged me stiffly and thanked me for taking care of his father. For a brief, foolish moment, I thought grief might have softened something between us. The lawsuit proved how wrong I was. This wasn't just about money. It was about resentment that had been growing for decades. About a man who never forgave me for staying when he chose not to. Walking into the courthouse that first day felt unreal. The marble floors were cold beneath my shoes. Every sound echoed. Doors closing, voices murmuring, footsteps fading. It was intimidating by design. Tyler was already seated, leaning back comfortably. Blake Harrington sat beside him, reviewing documents with absolute confidence. I took my place alone. Judge Mercer looked at me directly. Mrs. Thornton, do you have legal representation today? No, Your Honor, I said. I'm representing myself. A flicker of concern crossed her face. I strongly advise you to consider counsel. This case involves substantial assets. I understand, I replied. What I didn't say was that hiring a lawyer felt like admitting guilt. That using Charles's money to defend myself against his own son felt wrong. And that somewhere deep inside, I believed the truth should be enough. Blake presented his case with precision. He spoke of dependency, of control, of a woman who managed her husband's life under the guise of care. Every act of love was reframed as manipulation. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't argue law. I spoke honestly. I loved my husband, I said. I took care of him because I wanted to. Blake smiled faintly. Love is not what's on trial here, Mrs. Thornton. Judge Mercer raised her hand. That's enough for today. We'll adjourn until tomorrow. As people filed out, Tyler laughed quietly. Blake shook his hand. I remained seated, realizing something painful and important all at once. Kindness, I had learned, is often mistaken for weakness. That night, alone in Charles's study, surrounded by shelves of books and years of quiet memories, I noticed something I had overlooked for a long time. A small key. And with it, the beginning of a truth I had buried far too deeply. The key was small and unmarked, resting beneath the velvet lining of the jewelry box like it had been waiting for me to finally notice it. Charles had given it to me years ago, slipping it into my palm with a quiet seriousness I hadn't understood at the time. For emergencies, he had said, when you need it. I had never asked what it opened. That night, alone in his study, the weight of the courtroom still pressing against my chest, I finally understood what he meant. I crossed the room slowly, knelt beside his desk, and faced the bottom drawer I had never opened. It had always been locked. Not because I wasn't allowed, but because some spaces in a marriage are kept out of respect, not secrecy. The key slid in smoothly. The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside was a neatly arranged folder, manila and unassuming, labeled in Charles's careful handwriting. Rebecca, personal. My breath caught as I opened it. The documents inside were old but immaculate, preserved like something precious. A law degree, official certificates, appointments stamped with authority, a photograph of a younger woman standing straight, hand raised, eyes focused, and unafraid. I recognized her instantly. She was me. At the bottom of the folder lay a folded note written in Charles's familiar script. Rebecca, I know you believe you made yourself smaller when you chose love. You didn't. You chose something braver. If anyone ever forgets who you are, this will remind them, especially you. The tears came quietly, without drama. For 20 years, I had been a wife, a caretaker, a steady presence. I had allowed the world to believe that was all I was. But I hadn't disappeared. I had simply stepped aside. And now I was done waiting. The next morning, I wore the same navy dress to court. Not because I lacked options, but because I wanted nothing about me to seem different. Let them assume. Let them underestimate me again. The difference wasn't in what I wore, it was in how I walked. I entered the courtroom with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. Tyler and Blake were already seated. Blake reviewed his papers with the relaxed confidence of someone who believed yesterday had gone well. Tyler looked amused, as if this was a brief inconvenience before victory. Judge Mercer entered on time. Mr. Harrington, she said, you may call your next witness. Blake called my neighbor, Megan Pierce. Megan looked uncomfortable as she took the stand. She spoke about finding me crying on my front steps weeks after Charles's death. About how I said I was afraid of what would happen next. Blake let the silence stretch after her testimony, as if fear itself proved manipulation. "Mrs. Thornton," Judge Mercer said, turning to me, "do you wish to cross-examine?" "Yes, Your Honor." I approached the stand calmly. "Megan," I said gently, "when you found me that day, why was I upset?" She hesitated. "Because Charles had just been told the treatment wasn't working." "And what did I say I was afraid of?" She sighed softly. "You said you were afraid of being alone." I nodded. "Thank you." Blake's smile tightened. He called a banker next. Under my questions, the man admitted Charles had reorganized his finances months before his death, not to hide assets, but to simplify matters after he was gone. Preparation, not coercion. When I returned to my seat, Judge Mercer watched me closely. "Mrs. Thornton," she said, "may I ask something for the record?" "Of course, Your Honor." "What is your full legal name?" The room grew quiet. "Rebecca Ann Thornton." Judge Mercer repeated it slowly, her pen pausing midair. Her eyes lifted to mine, searching, measuring. "Before your marriage," she asked carefully, "did you practice law?" "I did, Your Honor." Blake shifted sharply in his seat. "In what capacity?" "I served on the Superior Court bench for 15 years, I said. "I retired 2 decades ago." Silence fell like a physical thing. Blake stood without realizing it. His briefcase slipped from the table and hit the floor, papers scattering. He didn't look down. He stared at me. "No," he whispered. Then louder, disbelief tightening his voice. "It's really you." He caught himself, then bowed his head slightly. "Judge Thornton," he said, "I appeared before you early in my career." Judge Mercer's expression hardened. "Mr. Harrington, did you conduct a full background investigation of the defendant?" Blake swallowed. "We reviewed public records under her married name. So you failed to investigate the woman you publicly described as uneducated and incapable," Judge Mercer said flatly. Blake said nothing. The courtroom felt different now. The balance had shifted and everyone could feel it. Judge Mercer called a brief recess. When we returned, the confidence on Tyler's side of the room had vanished. He stared at the table, his jaw tight, his earlier certainty replaced with confusion. "Your Honor," I said, standing once more, "I would like to present additional evidence." "You may proceed," Judge Mercer replied. I stepped forward, holding a slim tablet. "My husband anticipated this challenge," I said evenly. "He wanted his voice heard if his integrity, or mine, was ever questioned." I pressed play. Charles appeared on the screen, thinner than I remembered, but clear-eyed and steady. "My name is Charles Thornton," he said. "I am of sound mind. I'm recording this because I believe my son may one day claim that my wife manipulated me." Tyler's shoulders slumped. "Rebecca did not influence my decisions," Charles continued. "Every choice I made was my own. She stood beside me through illness and decline without complaint. She gave up a life most people only dream of because she believed in us." The video ended. I presented financial records next, documented loans, dates, amounts, and missed repayments, a pattern that spoke louder than accusation ever could. "This case," I said, "was never about manipulation. It was about entitlement." Judge Mercer reviewed the evidence in silence. "This court finds no evidence of undue influence," she said at last. "The will of Charles Thornton is valid and enforceable in full." Tyler stared down, defeated. The courtroom emptied quietly this time. 6 months later, my life looks different. I didn't return to the bench, but I opened a small practice. Focused, deliberate, and quiet. I represent women who are told they are too old, too dependent, or too invisible to understand their own lives. One afternoon, a message appeared on my phone. "I was wrong," Tyler wrote. "I'm trying to do better." We met for coffee. We spoke honestly. Not forgiveness, not yet, but accountability. And that was enough to begin again. 6 months after the courtroom doors closed behind me, my days no longer began in silence. I rented a modest office on the 3rd floor of an old brick building overlooking the city. The paint on the walls was neutral, the furniture simple, but the space felt right. Purposeful. A place where truth had room to breathe. I didn't reopen my life to prove anything to the world. I did it because I remembered who I was. My practice was small by design. I chose my clients carefully. Women like me. Women who had been told their lives were defined by the roles they played for others. Wives, caregivers, dependents. Women whose voices were dismissed the moment someone decided they were just something. The first client sat across from me, gripping her handbag so tightly her knuckles turned white. She was 62 and terrified of losing her home after her husband's death. Her stepchildren claimed she had manipulated him, that she didn't understand finances, that she was incapable of standing on her own. As she spoke, I saw myself in her. "You're not weak," I told her quietly. "You've just been underestimated." Word spread slowly. I didn't advertise. I didn't need to. Stories have a way of traveling on their own, especially when they restore dignity instead of taking it away. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a file, my phone buzzed. "Rebecca," the message read. "It's Tyler. I don't expect you to respond. I just need to say this." I stared at the screen longer than I meant to. "I was wrong," the message continued. "About you, about my father, about everything. I blamed you because it was easier than facing myself." I set the phone down and didn't reply right away. For weeks after the trial, I had carried anger quietly. Not sharp, not explosive, just heavy. Tyler hadn't only attacked my integrity. He had tried to rewrite my marriage as something ugly and opportunistic. That kind of wound doesn't disappear because a judge rules in your favor. 2 days later, I responded. "If you want to talk, we can meet for coffee. Public place, 1 hour." He agreed immediately. We met in a quiet cafe near the river. Tyler arrived early and stood when he saw me, unsure whether to sit or apologize first. He looked older somehow, less polished, more human. "I didn't know who you were," he said finally. "That's true," I replied, "but you also didn't try to find out." He nodded. "I thought if I proved you were nothing, then losing my father wouldn't hurt so much." There it was. Not justification, not forgiveness, but honesty. We talked for almost 2 hours. About his resentment, about my silence, about how grief had hardened into something neither of us recognized anymore. We didn't resolve everything. We didn't need to. When we parted, Tyler said something that stayed with me. "I think my father trusted you because you never needed to prove yourself." That night, standing alone in my office, I looked out at the city lights and finally understood something I had forgotten for a long time. I had spent years believing that choosing love meant stepping away from power, that being a wife meant shrinking my identity to make room for someone else's. But power doesn't vanish just because it's unused. It waits. The day Blake Harrington appeared in my office was unexpected. He stood awkwardly near the doorway, no briefcase, no sharp confidence, just a man who had learned something the hard way. "I wanted to apologize," he said. "Not as a lawyer, as a person." I gestured for him to sit. "I assumed," he continued, "that a woman who stepped away from the bench had lost her edge. I was wrong." "Yes," I said calmly. "You were." He smiled faintly. "You changed how I practice." That mattered more than I expected. Life settled into a rhythm after that. Mornings filled with work that mattered. Evenings that felt lighter. I visited Charles's grave on a quiet Sunday, bringing fresh flowers and a sense of peace I hadn't felt since he left. "I remembered," I told him softly. "You were right." As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed again. A new client request. Another story. Another woman who needed to be heard. Standing there, I realized something simple and powerful. Your worth is not measured by how loudly you speak or how visibly you succeed. It's measured by the truth you carry, and the courage to stand in it when someone tries to take it from you. I had been called just a housewife in a courtroom full of strangers. But the truth was far bigger than that. I was a woman who loved deeply, a woman who chose silence when it was kind, and strength when it was necessary. A woman who stepped aside and stepped back when it mattered most. And if my story reached you, wherever you're watching from, remember this. No one gets to define your life with 2 careless words.